What if everything you've been told about intelligence is a lie? When a liberal professor with an inflated ego decided to publicly humiliate Barron Trump, he didn't know he was signing his own death warrant. He was throwing down the gauntlet, handing respect to the con, but was he ready for the truth? Mensa test, the shocking results and the moment the audience froze in absolute disbelief. Who was a real genius and who was just saying beautiful words? The answer surprised you. Watch the video to the end. You definitely didn't expect this. When a professor set out to destroy Barron Trump. But something went wrong. The Harvard auditorium was buzzing. Students were settling into their seats, cracking jokes, checking their phones, preparing for Professor Caldwell's next lecture. There was a certain mixture of smugness and anticipation in the air that could only be found within the walls of an elite university, where intelligence is currency and arrogance is the norm. James Caldwell, professor of economic history, strolled into the room. Tall and thin, his jacket perfectly pressed and his signature shrinkage, he paused at the podium and looked around the room. Well, gentlemen, he smiled slightly, today we have a special guest. All heads turned to the young man in the third row. Barron Trump. Unlike most students, he sat up straight, without crossing his arms, without checking his phone, without chatting with his neighbors. Tall, calm, with a cold expression on his face, he was not a student here, but an outside observer. Caldwell's smile widened. It's a rare occasion when we have a person in our presence who is accustomed to power not by merit, but by surnames. Barron, would you like to share with us your deep understanding of economics? There was laughter in the room. Barron didn't move. I'm sure you can manage without me, he answered calmly. Caldwell pretended not to hear. Let's look at it from the other side, he continued. Why do you think people born into wealthy families so rarely have real intellectual abilities? An interesting hypothesis, Barron repeated, pausing. And what is it based on? Oh, just statistics, Caldwell chuckled. Look at history. Great minds rarely come from billionaire families. Power and money don't require intelligence. They require luck. The room came alive again. Some applauded. Some giggled. Barron was silent. Caldwell decided to finish it off. I understand, of course, that in your case, critical thinking is not your strongest quality. That's normal. People in your circle don't learn to think. They learn to repeat. The room burst into laughter. Barron finally bowed his head slightly. If that's so, Professor, why don't you need it? Eventually it became quieter. Sorry? If you are sure that I am incapable of critical thinking, why don't you do it? Caldwell narrowed his eyes. You're suggesting. What? An intellectual challenge, Barron said, looking the professor straight in the eye. The silence in the room became almost palpable. For example, let's compare IQ. At that moment, in the open air, one could hear someone pressing a button. Caldwell didn't even answer. Then, quickly recovering, he burst out laughing. Oh, that's wonderful. Do you seriously think you can get around me? If I lose, I'll admit you're right, Barron said calmly. But if I win? He paused, allowing the electricity to absorb the thought. You will publicly state that you were wrong. There were surprised exclamations in the hall. Caldwell frowned. The stakes had become too high. He glanced into the room. The students were waiting for his answer. If he spoke, it would look weak. Well, he said, crossing his arms over his chest, this will be funny. I hope you're prepared to be disappointed with Mr. Trump. Barron smiled. Let's see. The audience erupted. Some were already recording videos, anticipating the show. Some were whispering to their neighbors, discussing the madness of what was happening. Caldwell felt a surge of adrenaline. He was absolutely confident of victory. He didn't even suspect that he had made the slightest mistake. This professor was confident of his victory. Until he heard Barron's answer. It wasn't often that the Harvard campus had events that could blow up social media. But this controversy was something bigger. By the morning, the entire campus was buzzing. Professor Caldwell, one of the most vocal critics of the Gilded Youth, had openly spoken out in a public IQ comparison with Barron Trump. Rumors spread faster than exam results. Did you hear that? That Caldwell guy put his reputation on the line. He'll crush that guy. Really? Barron? He doesn't have a chance. Caldwell knew he was being noticed now, and he relished it. He walked down the hallway with the air of a man who already looked like he was grinning at students, discussing the intellectual competition to come. Barron, in contrast, was unusually quiet. He sat in the library, leafing through the pages of books on probability theories. His tablemates exchanged glances. Do you even realize what you've gotten yourself into? One of the students leaned toward him. I think so, Barron replied, not looking up from his book. That's Caldwell, the other insisted. He's a fucking PhD from Yale. He'll eat you alive. Barron finally looked up. If that's the case, I have nothing to worry about, right? The student fell silent. He expected everything except such certainty. Caldwell, meanwhile, having entered his audience, set to work attentively. So, students, his voice rang out across the room. Let's discuss why intelligence is what determines our place in society. Why not all people have equal rights? He paused dramatically. Look at the world around you. People with high intelligence run corporations, create technologies, change history. People without intelligence, well, they just inherit money and think they're smarter than everyone else. The result was a muffled laugh. Caldwell had happened. So our little experiment will be a wonderful proof of one simple truth. Intelligence is not something that is inherited. It is something that is earned. Barron sat in the same place he always did. He didn't write anything down, didn't check his phone, didn't talk to his neighbors. He just looked at the professor. Caldwell noticed this. What, presidential mister? Do you hope that genes decide everything for you? I hope the facts will put everything in its place, Barron answered calmly. Caldwell chuckled. Oh, confidence is a wonderful quality, but not when it is based on emptiness. The audience became animated again. The atmosphere grew tense. However, Caldwell bowed his head slightly. If you suddenly change your mind, it's not too late to leave with dignity. Barron leaned forward, sliding his fingers into the lock. Do you want me to refuse? I just want to save you the humiliation, the professor smiled. Barron nodded. Then let me suggest something. Caldwell frowned slightly. What exactly? Let's add a bet. The audience held its breath. If I lose, Barron paused, I will publicly admit that conservative students do not have all the intellectual abilities. Good move, Caldwell said approvingly. And if you win? Then you will do the same. Otherwise, there was dead silence. Somewhere in the back, someone let out a hoarse breath. This wasn't just a competition anymore. This was a test in which one of them had to admit he was wrong in front of the entire campus. Caldwell froze for a second. He couldn't win. Not now. Not in front of the entire audience. Okay, he extended his hand. You support your own sentence. Barron felt sorry for her. We'll see. When they removed their hands, the professor added, narrowing his eyes. The question is not whether I will win. The question is that it will be easy now. Barron paused again. Then you have nothing to worry about. The rest of the buzz was growing. People were chatting, discussing what had just happened. Caldwell, finally convinced of his victory, was already mentally preparing a speech about why intelligence cannot be replaced by family. Barron stood up, picked up his backpack, and headed towards the exit. Stopping at the door, he made a final remark, barely turning around. You should get some better sleep, Professor. Why is that? Barron smiled. That tomorrow will be a difficult day. I doubt. The audience erupted. Caldwell watched him go, frowning. He sensed something was wrong, but it is not yet clear what exactly. When the rumors spread, the professor realized that there was no turning back. The Harvard campus lived by its own strict laws. Here one could discuss the latest research, the intricacies of macroeconomics or Kant's philosophy, but the actress showed real intrigue, and the academic calm was disturbed like a house of cards. The dispute between Barron Trump and Professor Caldwell was not just an intrigue. It was an event. By midday, talk of the upcoming competition filled every corner of campus. Did you hear that? Barron actually challenged Caldwell. That professor would eat him alive. And if not, did you see how calmly he did it? The more people talked, the more the rumors grew. Some said that Caldwell had already regretted his chances, but he could not win without losing face. Some claimed that Barron was ready for this whole life and that his IQ was off the charts. By mid-afternoon, a wild rumor was circulating on campus that Barron had scored a sky-high 200 on a private test, but hadn't said so publicly. Caldwell, on the other hand, is stoic and unflappable. He sat in his office, absent-mindedly leafing through the pages of books on cognitive psychology. For the first time in a long time, he felt strangely justified. Come on, James, he muttered under his breath. He's just a student. Just a kid who grew up in a rich family. He remembered looking at him in the ocean. No fear. No anger. Just waiting. The professor shook his head. It seemed absurd to him that he was even thinking about these thoughts. Tomorrow he would tear Barron to pieces with the show, and that would be the end of it. But the sensation of sound did not go away. At the time, Barron was sitting in a campus coffee shop, drinking black coffee and reading an article about IQ testing. His friend Jason, who studied mathematics, plopped down in front of him. Okay, I need to ask. What the hell are you doing? Barron looked up. What exactly? You challenged Caldwell himself. Do you understand that you put at stake not just your reputation, but the whole topic of conservatives in elite universities? Barron put the article down. Good question. Do you even realize that if you lose, this guy will destroy conservative students for the next 20 years? He's using that as his main argument. Barron tilted his head slightly, considering what was said. What if I win? Jason fell silent. Do you seriously think you have a chance? Barron finished his coffee and put the cup on the table. We'll see. Meanwhile, Caldwell, walking around campus, noticed his colleagues looking at him with curiosity. James, the Langley philosophy professor, called out, You realize, of course, that if something goes wrong, it could be a career-ending moment? Oh, Langley, please, Caldwell chuckled. I teach at Harvard. You think I can lose a kid with the Trump family? Langley shrugged. I'm just saying, be careful. You're too confident. Caldwell waved it off and moved on. But something inside me sank. There was a strange feeling that he couldn't explain. It was as if he wasn't in control of the game the way he was used to. The campus was buzzing that evening. Someone started a poll in the student chat. Who would win an IQ test? The results were shocking. 52% voted for Barron. Caldwell stared at his laptop screen and felt irritation rising inside him. Did they really think I'm going to lose? He muttered. Did they really believe it? At that moment, he finally realized. Tomorrow is not just a test. Tomorrow he will either win, or he will become a laughingstock. Start test. But some already realized they lost. The Harvard auditorium, usually filled with lazy pre-lecture conversations, was elsewhere today. The buzz of voices merged into an electric noise as students gathered, chatted, placed bets. The atmosphere was less like an academic event than the anticipation of an epic duel. Barron was the first to enter. He walked calmly to his minute, casting a quick glance at the filled rows. Not a trace of nervousness, not the slightest worry. Professor Caldwell appeared a minute later, holding a pen and papers. He acted as if this day was no different from any other, but inside, he was shaking. He felt the looks. He heard the whispers. Do you see how calm he is? Maybe he just doesn't understand what he's gotten himself into, or maybe he understands it too well. Caldwell glanced at Barron, who sat with his arms folded and staring straight ahead, not looking away. At that moment, the professor realized, this guy is not afraid. It was weird. Wrong. He should have been nervous. There should have been some sign of anxiety. But no, and this infuriated him. Well then, Caldwell stepped forward, smiling at those around him. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have an experiment. He theatrically opened the latch. Mensa IQ test. The standard method of measuring cognitive abilities. Simple science, no subjective assessments. Just the facts. Barron again. Ready? Barron nodded. Mensa representative, an older man with gray hair, stood up. Each of you will have 45 minutes. The questions vary in difficulty, from basic logical problems to complex mathematical constructions. Your task is to solve as many correctly as possible. He handed out test sheets. Time has passed. The audience froze. Caldwell picked up a pencil and set to work, his fingers moving quickly, automatically. He had solved these tests 100 times. But after 10 minutes he felt that something was wrong. He had to reread the assignments. A strange fog appeared in his head. Why? He glanced at Barron. He worked methodically, his face remaining impassive. Caldwell swallowed and returned to the test. He couldn't afford to lose his financial stability. But after 2 minutes he realized he was increasing the pace. Letters subtract merge. The clock was ticking too fast. He already knew what was left. When time was up, a Mensa representative collected the tests. Thank you. The results will be ready in a few hours. Caldwell leaned back in his chair and wiped his forehead. The audience began to whisper. Did you see him? He was nervous. Barron doesn't even wait for the whole 45 minutes. What if? What if he actually won? Caldwell stood up and walked over to Barron. You're lucky that numbers decide everything here, he said through gritted teeth. Barron smiled slightly. Yes, Professor. It is a huge thing that matters. Caldwell turned and walked out of line without even looking back. For the first time in a long time, he felt like control was slipping out of his hands. The results revealed the terrible truth. Caldwell was no longer laughing. The time after the test dragged on painfully. The campus was alive with anticipation, the air thick with excitement. Everyone knew the results were coming soon, and the stakes were higher than ever. Caldwell sat in his office, drumming his fingers on the desk. He tried to concentrate, but his thoughts were jumping around like lights in a dark room. What if he loses? He quickly dismissed the idea. It was stupid. He was a teacher, a scientist, an expert. Barron was just a kid. But the mention of his impenetrability came the next day during a test that was not announced today. Caldwell turned on his laptop and opened his email. An incoming message from a Mensa representative. The results are ready. Announcement in 15 minutes. He looks deeply. The auditorium where the results were to be announced was packed to capacity. People stood in the aisles, climbed onto the windowsills, and some even broadcast live. Barron sat in his usual place, calm, confident, as if what was happening didn't concern him at all. Caldwell was the last to enter. He didn't like the way the students looked at him not as the final winner, but as a faction whose outcome had not yet been determined. A representative of Mensa, a man of 60, came out, carefully adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat slightly. Thank you for coming together. We have coordinated the results and are now ready to announce them. The audience froze. Caldwell straightened up, crossing his arms over his chest, giving the full picture. So, one of the participants scored 93 points. The other one, 170. Several people gasped. 93? That's a catastrophically low score for a professor. Caldwell frowned slightly. He didn't believe that this was his result, but something inside him felt a tightness in his chest. The average score for the class was 125, the representative continues. However, the results of the two participants differed significantly. Everything in nature froze. Caldwell felt a chill run through him in response. I scored 170 points. The pause lasted a split second, but felt like an eternity. Barron Trump. The hall exploded. What? Are you kidding? Damn it. 170? Caldwell was speechless. His mind refused to accept it. This is a mistake, he muttered. No mistake, the Mensa representative calmly laid his hands. The results have been confirmed twice. It's impossible, Caldwell's voice shook. He cheated. The audience exploded with indignant cries. Barron, for the first time in a long time, bowed his head slightly. Excuse me, Professor. Are you saying that IQ test results don't matter? Caldwell opened his mouth but found nothing to say. You've always said that intelligence is the main indicator of success. I'm just following your logic. There was a chuckle at this. Caldwell felt the world around him shrink. He lost. I lost so badly that there was no way out. Barron named his score. The professor's reaction was priceless. The audience exploded. People were talking. Some were clutching their heads. Some were laughing nervously. 17-0? Is that even real? Is he a genius? Caldwell stood in the center of these poems, but he heard nothing. The voices merged into white noise. The world narrowed to a single control number, 170. He felt anger boiling inside him. This is impossible, he muttered, clenching his fists. This is some kind of mistake. Barron tilted his head slightly, as if thinking. It's strange, Professor. You've always had such faith in these tests, but now that you won't need the results, you're doubting them? The roar in the ocean became louder. Caldwell stepped forward. You cheated somehow. Barron didn't move. Do you think I faked the test? Either that or Caldwell stopped. Or what? Or was he simply mistaken? Or was he not as smart as he was thought? His breathing became ragged. Barron placed his hands on the table and looked straight at him. Professor, what if your problem is not with the numbers, but with the fact that you simply cannot come to terms with the truth? Caldwell froze. Barron didn't speak loudly. He didn't shout. But there was something in his voice that made the audience freeze. Your theory was simple. Conservatives are stupid. Liberals are intelligent. Intelligence determines a person's value. Caldwell clenched his jaw. So, Barron paused. What if you were wrong? Silence hung in the air. Someone muttered. Oh, shit. Caldwell opened his mouth, but words failed him. He felt not just his opinion crumbling, but the entire concept on which he had built his beliefs crumbling. For the first time in many years, he didn't know what to answer. The professor's final argument and Barron's devastating response. Caldwell felt his breath catch. The audience wasn't just watching him. They were waiting. Waiting for his state, his justification, his final move. He couldn't just accept it. You. His voice wavered, but he quickly pulled himself together. You don't understand how the tests work. Barron bowed his head slightly, as if inviting him to continue. IQ tests are not absolute measures of intelligence, Caldwell began, his voice steady again. They only measure cognitive ability, logic, abstract thinking, but intelligence is more than numbers. Barron nodded. I completely agree. Caldwell blinked. Sorry? I agree that IQ is just a number and intelligence is much more complex. But it is strange that you are saying this only now, after you lost. Explosive laughter erupted in the hall. Caldwell turned. It doesn't matter what your results are, he spat. It doesn't make you intellectually or morally superior. Barron tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. So, intelligence is not only IQ indicators, but also the ability to analyze, learn, and admit mistakes? Yes, Caldwell turns quickly, feeling himself regain control. Barron smiled. Then why do you never admit yours? Caldwell tensed. What do you mean? For years, you built your reputation on the belief that liberal thinking equals intellectual superiority. You looked at students not as individuals, but as statistics. And now that those statistics are wavering, you suddenly change your mind. Caldwell opened his mouth, but Barron didn't stop. Yesterday, IQ was an absolute measure of intelligence for you. Today, it's just a number. I wonder what you would say if you scored 170? The hall froze. Someone muttered. Holy shit. Caldwell swallowed. Barron placed his hands on the table. You don't have to agree with my views. But maybe it's time to stop judging people based on your preconceived expectations. The silence lasted for several seconds. Caldwell looked at him, then at the students, and he realized he had failed not only the test. He lost the argument. The professor was silent. Barron had the last word. The audience held its breath. Caldwell, who had recently been shining in this same room, now looked as if the walls had changed, leaving him with no room to maneuver. He glanced out into the crowd. The faces of the students said it all. Some were holding back laughter, some were watching with genuine curiosity, and some were simply waiting for him to speak. But what can you say when every argument you make turns against you? He began, but the words got stuck in his throat. Barron kept his eyes on him. Calmly, without mockery, without malice. Caldwell tried to find a way out. He could say that the test results meant nothing, only that he had built his entire foundation back up. He could walk away, but that would be capitulation. The professor brought calculators. His voice wavered, but he pulled himself together. You think one test can change everything? Barron bowed his head slightly. Wasn't that your idea, Professor? Caldwell tensed. This is not. Barron slowly leaned back. Intelligence is not just a test, not just scores. It is the ability to see wider, to learn, to admit when you were wrong. The audience held its breath. Caldwell felt something inside him break. He couldn't argue. He knew Barron was right. All's knew. And he knew that they knew. A minute later, the lecture ended. The students began to leave, but the conversations did not subside. Barron stood up, picked up his bag, and walked over to the professor's desk. Caldwell stared into space. Barron holds a folded piece of paper in front of him. The professor slowly raised his eyes. What is this? Barron replied. That intelligence isn't just numbers. Caldwell looked at the paper but did not take it. Barron paused for a second, then turned and headed for the exit. When he reached the door, the professor, without realizing it, reached for the sheet of paper and unfolded it. The first line was short. Maybe you should try learning as well as teaching? Caldwell was deeply surprised. Barron disappeared through the door. The professor made it clear. This was a lesson he would not forget. When the professor realized that he had lost, it was already too late. That day, Professor Caldwell lost more than just an argument. He lost control of his reality. Everything he believed in, everything he had built his foundation on, crumbled to dust. He wanted to humiliate Barron Trump, but in the end, he himself was exposed. And Barron? He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He simply left the professor a note, a reminder that true intelligence isn't just about scores, it's about being able to admit your mistakes. But can Caldwell do it? Or will pride finally be his undoing? Watch this video to the end, like it, and write to the channel. And don't forget to click the bell. It will be even more interesting.